important thing to understand about North Korea is that their goal is not respect on the world stage. Their goal is power. That is why they've been developing these nuclear weapons and saying very threatening things about other nations in the region. So let's just keep that in mind as we go down and respond, hopefully line by line, to the arguments brought up in the negative block. All right, let's get into the disadvantage. The only disadvantage on the field at the moment is about China being very angered. I have about 5 responses to this. So the first one is non-unique. And I have a piece of evidence from Sidney Freeberg, who has a Master's of Military Studies from Harvard. He said in 2015, quote, "Might Beijing see the THAAD deployment as provocative in itself? This stuff is already happening," said former Pentagon strategist Van Jackson. "Strengthening missile defenses in Korea will do little to change the calculus." This is a very important piece of evidence because it's talking about the fact that the idea that China will respond negatively to these certain THAAD deployments has actually already been happening. The idea is that China is angry over certain defensive capabilities South Korea already has. That's already happening. So this is completely non-unique to our plan. Response 2, cannot threaten China, cannot threaten China. This is from Bruce Klinger, who's a former CIA chief and deputy division chief for Korea in 2015. Quote, "Beijing claims that the THAAD deployment would be against China's security interests, overlooking, of course, North Korea's deployment of nuclear weapons and missiles. THAAD cannot intercept Chinese ballistic missiles." This is something very important that we need to realize. THAAD cannot intercept missiles from China, therefore they have nothing to be concerned about. All right, my third response is minuscule impact, minuscule impact. This is from Dr. Bruce Bennett, who has a PhD in policy analysis it does not have a date. It says, quote, "China might retaliate against Seoul in the short term, either economically or diplomatically, for a THAAD deployment. But by demonstrating its independence and unwillingness to be leveraged by China in areas of national security, South Korea would likely avert future Chinese pressure in other issues." This completely turns what they were saying, because by actually resisting Chinese pressure, it's reducing reliance on China for South Korea, which is very important to their national security interests. All right, my fourth response is sources support THAAD. Sources support THAAD. Now, you might have realized in the evidence I was reading, I was quoting people called Friedberg, Klinger, and Van Jackson. Those were all of the people they used to support their points. And guess what? We read from those people in their website, and they in fact support that. So while they might have some reservations concerning China, they've looked at that entire globe and those conflicts, and they realized that that actually, in spite of all those problems, is vital for South Korea to have. All right, response 5 is outweighed by lives, outweighed by lives. This disadvantage's doomsday impact is the economy gets hurt. Now, while that might not be a great thing, the problem is if we refuse to trade THAAD to South Korea, we would be losing millions of lives. That completely outweighs this disadvantage in favor of the affirmative team. All right, let's get into their solvency point about how South Korea doesn't have money and won't pay for THAAD. I have 2 responses. Number 1 goes to THAAD, goes to THAAD. They were talking about LSAM and how all of the money going toward LSAM is tied up and South Korea can't pay for that. Well, the problem is that would be going to THAAD. They have no reason to develop LSAM if they have THAAD, which of course they've stated is vital to their national security. Response 2, not yet built, not yet built. LSAM is in the process of being built. They've tried to develop this system. It's not actually on the ground. There is no technology. They're still studying and trying to figure out how it would actually work. And again, my partner brought up the point that it is not going to be ready for at least 30 years. That is a time frame that we cannot allow South Korea to be without a defense. All right, let's get into the next speech was about the subpoint A. He talked about our harm and said that we dropped that point. I'd really quickly like to point out that experts say there is danger. Experts say there is danger. This is what we've been talking about throughout our entire round. And while we didn't respond line by line to those points, our experts have said multiple times there is danger from North Korea because they have an arsenal that is powerful. All right, let's get into the whole idea of a North Korean threat. Once again, I don't really have time to respond line by line, so I'm going to have one overreaching response. That is expert analysis. Expert analysis. We have analysis from people high up in the U.S. government who are consulates with the Department of Defense, and we have people who have been stationed in South Korea and seen the threat that the North poses. And they all say one thing. North Korea is dangerous, they have weapons, and they are willing to attack South Korea for very little reason. All right, so let's get into the last points about the Mutual Defense Treaty. A quick response, the U.S. won't respond with nukes. The U.S. won't respond with nukes. Once again, mutual defense doesn't really work, as my partner so clearly pointed out in his speech. And finally, we talked about how the need is irrelevant and South Korea won't take it. My response is the government says it is vital. And that is why we need to trade that to South Korea. Thank you.
Starting for time.